Okay, we're going to look at English language paper 2, question 4, comparison of attitudes and methods, which is probably the most difficult question. It certainly takes the most work. You think that question 4 in paper 1's hard, but this is two sources. One that's from the 19th century, so that makes it, you have difficulty in terms of time and language, but it's this comparison. Attitudes should be easy. Like, attitude, kind of, if you really think about it, very basic, kind of is the, and it's very rare the author is neutral, but is the author positive about this issue or negative about this issue, and or that's really basic, but it gets more nuanced than that. But that's a good place to start, particularly if you're someone who finds this difficult. And finding these points of comparison gets easier when you think about it just that way, in terms of, like, are they for it or are they against it? Anyway, methods, definitely back to these devices. So how do writers show their attitudes? How do the writers show their attitudes in similar and different ways? Okay, so let's just remind ourselves how to do the paper. And then, like, the order, which I've been doing in all these videos, but it's really important to go through again. And then remember, most of the marks are towards the end of the paper. Question 5 is worth 50% of the marks, so the writing is significantly more important than anything else. Well, equally as important, but all the questions 1 to 4 combined give you question 5. As I said, as opposed to language paper 1, there isn't necessarily an advantage to doing the reading section before you do the writing section, though AQA would disagree. Question 1, 4 marks. Question 2, this very difficult question, summarizing difference, which I would argue is much easier after question 4. So if you go question 1, question 3, and now you're in question 4 in anticipation for question 2, comparison of attitude and methods. What you've got to do is you've got to build a little table like this, where you get an attitude and a method in source A, an attitude and a method in source B, an attitude and method in source A, and an attitude and method in source B. This could be 4 paragraphs, this could be 2 paragraphs, this could be 3 paragraphs, depends on how you want to do it. You could go 1, 2, 3, 4. You go 1, 2, 3, which is a lot of my students discover that that's probably the most realistic. You could do 1, 2, but that's not really ideal, particularly for comparison. However you do this, it's really important you discover and make precise your comparison style, because it will help you a great deal when you're doing the poetry comparison in the literature exam. So again, I'd encourage you to go 5, 1, 3, 4, 2. Either way, we're looking at question 4 today. So here I am. I'm just getting my materials together. Now, you have these 2 sources, which I've just printed out, kind of like this. If you're annotating as you go along, you'll already get a sense of one of the sources, particularly from question 1 and 3. I believe on this paper, they're both from the same source, so you already have a kind of advantage. This is unannotated, but yours would be annotated. The one thing I really want you to think about is separating the sources so that you have them next to one another. If you're marking them up, you'll find this exercise easier. So let's take a look. For this question, you need to refer the whole of A and the whole of B. Now, whole of A, whole of B does not mean you need to quote from the whole of both sources. In fact, if you get strategic, you may get enough early on in reading. And it could prepare you for writing this. You don't have to read the whole source. Compare how the writers convey their different perspectives and feelings about their children growing up. So the focus of the question is children growing up. And you need to get that question focus right away. And what you're going to do is you're going to compare the perspectives and the feelings. So you have source A, source B, you have the attitudes, you have the methods the writer used, and of course the third bullet point's useless. So essentially, attitude, method, attitude, method. If you build a quick table like that, if you get a quote, I like a backup quote to a method, if you're able to do this efficiently, you should be able to do that, I don't know, in probably, let's see, the time I give for this question is, I will come to you in a second, I'd say about, look, with the revised timing, based on its weightings, I almost suggest 29 complete minutes. I think you should be able to read and plan in 9 minutes. And that gives you 5-minute paragraphs if you're going to do 4 for the pace. That's something I haven't talked about very much, but writing pace is really important to think about. But for now, 9 minutes, I think, is what it's going to take you to read both sources and build the planning table. And then you're going to have to write at quite a quick, swift hit. When we do the revision in class, you will see I've given you some examples of how you'd build this table. I always start with, when I'm reading the sources, with a plus and a minus, as I mentioned. But I start with the evidence, then I go up to the method, and then up from the method I come up with my point or topic sentence. I prefer topic sentence. And the key thing you've got to think about is a comparison, because you are trying to say, okay, look, in the first source, we get this idea of the boy born, blinked, now little boy, turns TV off at the important moment, hard to grasp. We get imagery, we get the idea of time passing quickly. Alliteration, though I'm not a very big fan of that in prose to look at, but you can do that as you wish. What I've tried to do here is give you an example of a topic sentence that integrates the method into the topic sentence. So the writer uses imagery to show his difficulty in understanding how quickly time has passed in his son growing up. In the second source, there's this idea of this old woman kind of remembering the past and the emptiness of her house, and the house is really orderly right now, and then she compares it to when it was filled with toys and just a mess. So what we really get is the contrast between the imagery of the present and the past, and how even though adults liked the house better, she liked it more when it was messy. So the topic sentence I came up with here is, the writer also uses imagery in source B, but uses contrast to show how much the writer misses when her child was a small boy. Now, it seems quite easy because I've given you the topic sentence to integrate the method and the attitude, but that's a lot more complicated than you could think, and it really requires practice. It really requires that you get out the relevant evidence first, that you identify the methods, and that finally you're able to identify some kind of attitude and method. Okay, now that would be kind of 2 paragraphs depending on how you write. let's take a look at some others that I've done to show you something that maybe you could think about practicing. Okay, so we know these quotes: scrunched up flesh, running up to people, waiting them to twang his lips like a ruler, barks gibberish like trying to shove the noise up a hill. What I like about this is we're reusing evidence. So we're being strategic from source A. Source B, right? She's missing her son and she has this kind of nostalgia. Liberty for concerts, lectures, and parties. That's her life now. Whereas before it was school bells, wash and brush, bounding to school. She had to obliterate mud stains, fruit stains, paints of all colors. She contrasts adult interests with responsibilities of parenthood. And for me, again, that's imagery. So we get imagery to show change, imagery to show something quite different. So what is the attitude? Well, the attitude here is maybe, though growing, still silly. Maybe. Whereas in source B, this is done through imagery. Whereas in source B, the imagery and the contrast suggest sadness at child growing. You see, it's not that easy to do the topic sentence, but it's a lot easier if you have the evidence first. The evidence is key. I've overplayed the evidence to just give you an example of how to do this. Okay, here, so let's do the last one. Different child, dispatches from 1,000,000 years ago. Never again, nestled in the crook of my arm. One day I'll creep up on him. You can't hoard time. That's great, that metaphor. So the method, I think, is metaphor. And what does the metaphor show us? That accepts the child growing and accepts it through metaphor. Whereas in the second source, when you read it, you'll see she sees her son now and he's older. He's manly. Even though he's still my boy, little boy is lost. My big boy will soon be. How patient I would be. I wonder if they know they are living their very best days. So she's nostalgic about the past. I think the main thing she does and through the whole thing is contrast. And what she's doing is contrast shows how much she preferred the past. So whereas in source B, I'll just talk it out. Source B uses contrast to show how much she preferred when her child was small in the past. Source A, in contrast, uses metaphor to articulate the writer's acceptance of the rate of the child growing older. So what you get is then, you see that exercise looks something like this. Then when you're writing it, it's a topic sentence, which is a comparison of attitude. You could compare method. You want evidence times 2. You always want 2. You want analysis. Squeeze the key word. You want explanation, and that's key, which is explanation of the attitude. I forgot device and effect, and it's okay. because that's really the method. And then you come back to the topic sentence of a comparison. This is really technical. If you haven't done this kind of writing before, you're going to find this really hard. But essentially, this is back to it's really simple. It could, if you like what, how, why, that works. If you like point, evidence, pedal, technique, analysis, link, those work too. We do Pee-wee, whatever one you want to do. You can structure this paragraph. It's essentially an analytic comparative paragraph. The key thing you got to remember for this question is you've got to plan the question. If you don't plan the question, you're not going to get very far. So what you're doing is you're asking yourself while you're reading, why has the writer selected this approach? What are the details the writer wants you to pay attention to? How does it affect the way the reader responds to the text? What features of the text? I wouldn't personally, this is AQA's advice, I personally wouldn't go for structure. I'd be looking for language. How does the writer, sorry for the typo, how does the writer show their attitudes through literary devices? If you do a planning table, maybe you could put another row for comparison. This will help you write, and it'll be much clearer what you're doing. You'll say the attitude in source A, you'll do the analysis, you'll compare, you'll do it in source B, like that. If you don't plan, this question is very hard to be successful at. I hope that, I know that was a kind of whistle stop, and there's a lot to do there. You're not really going to understand it until you do the paper yourself. And for this revision session, when you come, I'll give you a lot of exemplars to show you what success looks like.